And I'm going to call today's meeting of the Bellevue Urban Renewal Agency to order. Roll call.
Chairman Shea,
Yes.
Commissioner Kurtz here, Board Member Kurtz. Board Member Carrera,
Yes.
Board Member Pritchard,
Yes.
and Board Member Blacker is absent.
Okay, and our newest member that we finally got someone to, I don't know if you know each other, but
No.
Tressa, why don't you take it away? Give us a little.
This is item 6 on the agenda.
It's what?
Item number 6A. On the agenda.
Oh, well.
We can-
Does anybody have a problem with us meeting her at the top of the meeting?
Yeah.
I am Tressa Pritchard. I grew up here in Bellevue. Just moved back 2 years ago. I am. I guess you would call me a business owner in Haley. I do hair. I run a station over there. I work for myself and I love Bellevue, so here I am.
I think the thing that hooked me when we met and talked with her is that she said, I'm from Bellevue and this is home.
Yeah,
I came back here and this is home.
yeah, I wanted to be home.
Yay!
I apologize.
We actually apologize. I figured 4 o'clock was gonna be a hard time for you
Yes,
with school,
but I'm here, so sorry.
we will make it, does 4:30 work better for you?
That's way better.
Okay, then, kind of note that. Doing, 4:30 from here on out. Ian is also, Tressa just introduced herself.
Hi.
This is Ian Blacker, and, do you wanna say a couple things about yourself?
My name's Ian Blacker. I teach at the high school. I teach construction classes at the high school, and I'm a general contractor as well. My wife and I and 3 boys, only 1 boy at home anymore. We've been in Bellevue since 2012, so.
Perfect.
Yep.
And for the record, Ian Blacker is in attendance.
I noted 1602.
Okay, great. The third item on our agenda then is our notice of agenda compliance. Per Idaho Code 74204. The meeting notice and agenda were posted in accordance with Idaho Code 74204. Within 48 hours prior to the meeting at Bellevue City Hall, Post Office, and the city's website on October 30th, 2025.
I wrote that the agenda notice for the November 4th, 2025 meeting was posted in accordance with Idaho Code Section 74204.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Call for conflict. Anybody have a conflict with items that are on this afternoon's agenda? No. Perfect. Public comment for items of concern not on the agenda. I see no one in the audience that may wish to comment. I don't see anybody on
There's nobody on.
the Zoom. So, I will close the public comment. And the new business, which we pretty much already covered, was the introduction of new board members. And I just again want to say thank you very much for stepping up to this very well-paid position. We really appreciate your time.
I just love that as much as you, me and John.
It's been slim pickings.
No offense,
so
John.
we're anxious to have some different conversation. All right, item 7 is our old business, and we have some project updates on items that our board had discussed earlier in the year, and probably last fall at some point as well. And the first one is the dead end rights of way. Brian, you want us?
Brad Park, Community Development Director and Secretary. The dead end rights of way RFP is live for the new members. The project area is the bits of land between Main Street and Howard Preserve where it goes half a block and then falls off a cliff. And the alley that runs behind it there, it's planning and landscape architecture to kind of conceptualize some improvements and ways to better utilize that and disperse economic development on Main Street and the Beaufort. So the RFP, like I said, is active. The version that is in his packet went out, and then one of the consultants let me know that the due date was Thanksgiving Day. So I modified that and it was a week later. December 4th is when the submittal is due. Like,
Christina with Great West is trying to get on, saying the Zoom link's not working.
oh,
Sorry to interrupt.
give her email.
I have her phone number where she's at. So I can call her or whatever.
What's the phone number?
208-602-4623.
4623?
Yes,
And, for you guys, she is one of our contract engineers, Great West Engineering,
Hey,
which is an
good.
engineering.
That
firm.
Zoom link, yeah, wasn't working. I sent it to everyone now to the calendar. I don't think you're on that. What's your email address?
That's who our contract engineer is at this point, and I think she was gonna try and come on and talk to us about some streetlights and things like that.
So the right of way along here, I've walked it, drove it a couple of times. So that's like, I guess I just assumed that was the business's property. It's not, that's city right of way.
It's actually Main Street is
Just sent you an updated
ATV's
calendar
right
invite. Lincoln.
to them.
To them.
And so they're the ones that maintain it.
Okay.
So they did the paving project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Earlier this
Thank
summer.
you.
And the dead end portions that we're talking about, I mean, to give you an example, is like between the Cutthroat Club.
Yep.
And, is it Sally's? What is it? Betty's.
Yep.
And so we have, I don't know, 5 or 6 streets that just dead end there. Cause they can't be extended.
Right.
Just because of the topography, the canal, the slope. And so we're trying, I'm just giving some backstory here. We're trying to come up with ways to utilize those spaces. In, well, I guess we could do with the winter months as well. I mean, you know, with a big Christmas tree and carolers and all the stuff, and in the summer, maybe some Friday afternoon bands or, you know, barbecues or something set up so that we can utilize those spaces to create a gathering space. For just walkability, just to get people out and
Right.
utilizing our.
So the area, so I see 7 streets that run like essentially east-west, and then we see the long right of way in red, north to south.
Yes.
Is that part of the area in question as well? Like, what do we do with that?
Yeah,
Okay,
Thank you.
Yeah, that's not an alley behind.
exactly, exactly.
yeah, and that's the stuff that you would think that, oh, maybe that's a.
Well, that's like what,
Road to walk down.
Yeah.
That's just part of theirs, but you know how it is, everybody just continues to encroach and do
Exactly.
their thing.
Okay.
And so, but it is city of Bellevue property.
Right.
Great.
Success.
Okay, thanks. I think we got success.
Okay. So anyway, what we've talked about is, as Brian stated, coming up with, some, vision. Going up, having a landscape architect, having a firm bid. Or at least give us a proposal on what they envisioned. You might know Chase Goulet. He grew up here. Anyway, and he sat on city council. No, he sat on P and Z for several years, but anyway, he's a landscape architect, he's interested in looking at the proposal because he has ties to this community and feels like it's important. So anyway, that's one of the things that we're talking about. So is there, we really don't have any action on that?
No, I think
Right
one thing
now.
we should discuss and kind of go through is, there's the submittal deadline, and then there's going to be a selection process, so we should have some committee members, some more members serve on that selection committee. Speaking with the attorneys, it seems like a open meeting mess to try and have a quorum of commissioner or board members serve on the selection committee, and so I think you guys, it'd be great if you would kind of choose two members to.
So I have a question about what Megan said and it being an open meeting mess. What is her thought process behind that?
That we are selecting a service provider and doing contracty things. That typically, there's a level of protection of that. And so in order to have it in an open meeting, those protections get lost and would just not be the best practice.
So Brian put together this,
Yeah.
formula. He's still having trouble.
So I send you.
Anyway, of scoring. What these proposals might look like, and so, I guess that's the discussion that we can have,
Send it.
about who
I'll put you on speaker.
would be interested or most qualified or most interested in
Thanks.
serving on this selection committee.
Yeah.
Brian and I were chatting before the meeting and we thought that he and I could do that, but I'm absolutely open to engaging the rest of the board and who might be interested in serving. I don't believe it would be a massive time consuming project. It just depends on how many landscape architects bid the project. We did budget $100,000
Yes.
for some or all of this portion. And again, I mean, I think we're just talking about these dead end rights of way. But I mean, maybe it could morph into a larger project. Ian, do you have a
I
question?
do, the $100,000, is that just landscape architect fees or the entire?
The entire
Okay.
design, probably not the build,
Okay, so the design side.
but I'm assuming,
I think we're
It was-
looking at that as, it's the conceptual design. It's not engineering drawing or anything, it's just conceptual. For what this could look
that's a lot of money.
like.
Yeah,
I just think that, it's important to. With, however many people apply, to, or bid, be on this, is that we do it to follow the criteria. So we're being objective with who we're getting and how they qualify, because I've been through different, selection, process before and through different forms of my work, and, it's easy to get biased one way or another. And it's important that whoever is on that or gets selected, is all that, and make sure we're consistent,
yeah.
and transparent with how we make our selections.
So I'm happy to have more conversation about this, anybody can answer questions. Yeah, go ahead.
So what's gonna be on the 27th? We're bumping it back to December 4th.
Yeah.
So when is our next meeting for this week? Like,
We're good.
That is item number 8 on the agenda.
okay,
By bylaws, the next meeting is the first Tuesday in February.
Okay.
I would like to move forward faster than that, so I would like, a time that would work for you guys for a special meeting, probably sometime in December.
Yeah, and if,
We could
if
get that.
the application deadline is the December 4th, then we can meet shortly thereafter to go through this, evaluate it, and make a recommendation.
So the selection committee should probably meet this week or two after that, and the full board, I think. Receive a presentation from the selection committee and their recommendation. Final decision.
Yeah, so that puts us like,
That was right in the middle of the holidays.
Right in the middle.
Maybe early January or also.
yeah. I think it would be worthwhile to have a third person on the selection committee. I mean, you two and somebody else, I mean, I could do it, but if you guys want to or be interested.
I mean, I'm open to whatever, so,
So,
you know me, I'm fun. You know,
Ian, do you have
I think more people the better.
grand ideas?
I don't know about grand ideas, but
And if we have three, then it's like you're 1, 2, and then 3, or is that, or
So-
three?
Two board members, two for the maximum before we hit a quorum and one.
So are you a board member?
I am the secretary.
Right.
So you plus two others.
Right, I do not have one.
So
so the selection committee would meet when, the 4th?
Would be
Week after?
sometime.
I would like to do it as quickly as possible because I would like to be able to get this project somewhat solidified so that in the spring, we can move forward with something. We've been sitting on this for a long time. So earlier the better, so December 4th is a Thursday. Does that date work for everyone at 4:30? That's a better time for Ian.
December 4th?
5:30.
I'm out.
December 4th.
December 4th, I hop on a plane to South Korea. Oh, geez.
You're gonna be where?
South Korea.
Oh, wow.
But we'd have to meet after 5:30, right?
Can you zoom?
I can be on the airplane. I don't think they will allow that.
So if we met December 4th, it'd have to be after 5:30 when submittals are due.
I think you need to give,
Yeah.
give Brian
Right.
a
Yeah.
handful of days
Yeah,
at
if
least.
if they're coming in the 4th, I think it should be after.
Okay,
Yeah, he did it sometime the week of the 8th, or even the week of the 15th.
Yeah.
Cause either way,
Yeah.
we're not gonna
Sure.
meet again until early January.
John, when are you back?
I'm back the following week. We're only gone for like 5 days.
Okay. Does the 11th
Yeah, 11th works.
have any,
So
go ahead.
who's on the selection? That's who we.
I think we're just trying to figure out a next meeting date right now, and then our next.
Selection committee should meet prior to the next meeting. Of the board.
All
So they
right,
come in, the selection committee meets, and then we meet.
Right.
so then you're not available on the 4th.
I'm not available on the 4th.
Anybody else have problems? Is that what you're getting at, that we need to have the selection committee meet before our meeting on the 11th or whenever we're picking the next day?
So. Go to the front. The submittals are due end of day on the 4th. Sometime the week of the 8th, the selection committee should meet. Sometime after the selection committee meets, the full board should meet. So probably the week of either the week of the 15th or after Christmas.
Yeah, I think that week of the 15th is just cut it too close to holidays and So,
So then if we're gonna have the full board meeting after the holidays in early January, the selection committee should meet sometime in the week of the 8th or 15th.
I'm just throwing. I follow what you're saying, but I mean, does anyone here have an issue with the week of the 15th?
not right now, no,
I mean, the following week is, really the holiday week.
when do you get out of school?
The calendar says, if we're meeting at 4:30, it doesn't matter.
And are you booked that far out?
I can block myself off, so,
Okay.
and I can move people around, so it doesn't matter.
Okay,
Yeah,
so. It sounds like the week of the 8th, you're gonna be back,
I'll be back I'll be back on the 9th.
all right,
We need to figure out who's on the selection, committee.
right,
Who's gonna be you on
I'd be happy to.
it, okay, so you guys are on it, now you guys need to pick a date,
Yep.
when you're gonna meet.
you should be sitting here.
Diane, I can meet any day on the 8th, or the week of the 8th.
The week of the 8th.
Yep.
How about the 11th?
Perfect.
We'll just keep
4:30?
to our Thursday. Yeah, 4:30 work for you.
Thursday or Wednesday?
Thursday.
It's a Thursday. Thursday, the 11th. All right, and so that's two of us.
Now we need to figure out, do we wanna meet as a?
Well, are we gonna have three?
Me, I'll be the fifth.
Okay. Okay,
Now we need to figure out, we're gonna meet as a board the week of the 15th, or if we're gonna wait until the early January.
I think it would be smart to do it in December.
get it going earlier.
So, yeah.
Okay, so. Then the week of the 15th. Are you're not working at the moment?
Nope.
Sorry, John. So, maybe just to keep consistent with our Thursdays. Does December 18th at 4:30 work for everyone? And that's when we will be reviewing the proposals. No,
The
that's when we'll be,
selecting it.
yeah,
all right.
yeah. Okay. All right. Phew. Moving on. Does anybody else have any questions or discussion about these rights of way or? Guess we'll just move through that then to the next updates, and that would be streetlights. We've also been talking about streetlights forever. Just I give a little background on our streetlights. We have several that ITD has destroyed in big snow years. And we also have a dark sky ordinance that our streetlights are out of compliance with. We have been out of compliance since the dark sky ordinance came into play. So, so anyway, we're talking about a new streetlight design, Brian.
Yeah, so the first step in that is figuring out all things that are currently broken and what needs fixed and how much that's going to cost. To do this, I reached out to the city's contracted city engineer, Great West Engineering. That are gonna put together a task order to investigate that and come up with cost estimates and process and standards. Christina from Great West is online. If you guys have questions for her, for the phone.
So I thought we had gotten a number from Casey about the number of streetlights that we had.
Yes, we have GIS. The number of streetlights and which ones are working, and which ones are not. What we don't have is why and what it's going to take to fix it. There's most likely some electrical damage in the conduit under the sidewalks, which is gonna require tearing the sidewalks.
for several years, the streetlights were not wired. And, wired for Christmas decorations, and we had a very generous business owner within the last 5 years. Start buying those snowflakes that we have now, and the city realized after we had gotten halfway underway with that project that a lot of those were not wired. And so that was a big expense to get those, somebody to come in and wire those here.
So they're not wired at all, or the wiring is damaged?
It
Like,
sounds like some of them are damaged.
Yeah.
okay. So at one point they worked.
I'm not sure we ever put Christmas decorations.
But the light itself,
The
that,
light, the
yeah,
acorn
okay.
light works. I think but we are talking about a new design overall so that we are compliant. And that would require us to have a full downcast
Mhm.
light.
So with that, though, when ITD plows and they do damage to our infrastructure, why are we having to pay for it? Why doesn't ITD
Yeah.
charge me that?
I think it
Moving
happens,
forward, we are going to
yeah.
start holding them to their.
I think that happened so many years ago, John. I mean, at least 10 years ago.
So it's,
And not all, some of them are vehicle and urban insurance.
Forward, yeah.
I mean, do we have any idea what we want the light fixtures to look like? I mean,
Christina, are you there? Hello?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Sorry about that. I was having a little
Hi.
issue. Hi. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Christina Gillespie Jakes with Great West. Andrew called me, kind of in a panic because he was in a very sketchy spot in Idaho, trying to travel back from council. And then Addie is right now on a plane. So, Andrew just said, is there any way you can just step in and take any questions from you folks? So because I have no idea how to answer your questions from our seat today, and I apologize about that, but I can certainly write these down, and Addie and Andrew, when they are back in the office, can certainly get the responses back to you guys. We could send them to Brian, and then Brian, if you want to filter it out to the members of the committee, would that work? Or I apologize.
But as far as the final design of the fixture itself, I think that's something that we'll figure out.
okay,
later
I'm
on.
just curious, like, are we looking for something similar to this design now? Or are we looking for something different? You know,
Well, I had seen some pictures of some of the streetlights that McCall had,
Uh-huh.
and Brian let me know that they were quite expensive.
They're
But
great,
I'm sorry,
they're great, but
yeah,
quite expensive, and I don't think something that ITD will allow in their right of way. Breakaway compatible.
what do you mean?
So if you look at the light fixtures that are currently standing, you'll see there's like a little gap at the bottom and 4 bolts. That is designed so that when a car hits it, it
Gotcha, okay.
tips over instead of not tipping over. The ones that we had in McCall, there's a like 2 by 2 by 3 foot tall concrete base that is very solid.
Can we retrofit the existing lights? Put a shield on them or something to make them dark sky compatible?
Potentially.
Okay.
That's something we can look at.
yeah, I mean, I because, we've got the post. And then we've got like the shepherd's hook, and then the acorn sits there, and, I mean, obviously it would be maybe more cost effective if we were able to utilize the post and the shepherd's hook. But And we would just have to make sure then that the fixture that is on there is gonna be shielded somehow.
So on the shield, we also wanna make sure that it's actually casting usable light for crossing the street and things. I'm not sure that.
I mean, one of the reasons I'm asking if this is only because, they're now open is, Carl Malone Ford has, all those lights in their parking lot. It's like, I mean, they put up plenty of light, from a simplistic approach, I'm sort of looking at like that design. But for conversation purposes.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
you know.
So I guess Ian, to answer your question, I think that it's a possibility to retrofit. But we also, how much money did we set aside for this? Did we set?
So we set aside 100,000 for the preliminary engineering. I don't think we'll spend all of that, but that's what we budgeted.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we can use some of that for actual repairs.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, sorry,
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, does that include like fixing? Where the sidewalk is, where is that 100,000 going towards? Fixing the sidewalk so we can fix the wiring and all the things.
Not,
It's
figuring out how much that's going to cost. Spend money on.
That's, we gotta go around to each light fixture. Uncover enough so you can see what kind of wires are there or not there and.
Right.
And then go make a task list of this is what needs to happen for each one.
so regardless of what it looks like, we still have to fix everything underneath first, so we
Yes.
should probably worry about that first.
What's your knowledge on like solar powered ones, and if it's solar powered, do you even need to go rip out the sidewalk?
That is another thing we could look at.
That's a good idea,
Uh,
but when it snows,
Yeah, yes, challenges with snow country.
unless I can wipe it off.
The-
And that seems to be.
For
what
reference,
the
the
plans.
blinky crossing lights on Main Street are all solar powered. In case he said that those are $18,000 a piece for one side.
Yeah.
So,
How many lights do we have?
I thought there was 26.
sounds about right.
I didn't even, I went and did an inventory of them in the old town part of Main Street. I didn't go much further north or south than that, cause they're more north and south of like, what would be like core of town. I don't remember a number, but there's a good number of, streetlights at irregular intervals, and I'd say less than half of them work currently.
Well, I guess depending on how much it's gonna cost for the sidewalk fixtures, it might be worth it to do the solar. Like, the crosswalks,
Or explore that.
yeah,
Christina, I have a question.
Yes.
So maybe this is something that you can forward on to Andrew. But I guess, does your firm have experience with selecting or suggesting, streetlight fixtures?
I am certain we do, but let me get that question over to Andrew and Addie, and I'm certain we do. We work with several communities very similar to Bellevue, and so I apologize that I don't know the answer to that question, but I will get that over to the team and we'll get that over to you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I would think too with this, the conceptual design, of the streets, the dead and right of ways, because those are gonna come out. They're faced with the Main Street, and that can be kind of. Cause what this is gonna do is just tell us, okay, what do we need to do to fix these things? But then once we get into the implementation, maybe we can, utilize and incorporate some of that into.
Cause I think what we wanna see for our Main Street is like a cohesive plan, so that it just makes sense and we don't have.
Because if you're ripping out streetlights and doing redo a sidewalk, you might as well do a sidewalk redesign if you're wanting a sidewalk redesign, and then the law wrapped up in everything else, so.
And there's hopefully some grant money out there in the world, if we can leverage to go further than just the borough budget.
Well, since we are convening a meeting on December 18th, do I have that correct?
Yes.
Just so that I can wrap my head around that. Maybe prior to that, we can get some ideas from Great West, some examples of streetlights that we might be able to use. And if anybody is doing a little bit of research up late at night, and you can't sleep and you wanna look at streetlights. If anybody has a design that they feel like might be something that we could use. And then, if we could get those compiled and, assembled for our next packet on December 18th. So that we can maybe review those and see if there's something that everybody really just loves or. So does does everybody wanna just continue this on to December 18th for more discussion?
Yeah.
All right, Brian, we didn't take a motion on the dead end rights away.
There's, I mark things as action items out of an abundance of caution. In case you guys decide to take motion on it or something, you do not have to take motion on anything, but. Yeah.
And I think in your staff report, it also says no action.
Right.
So, so I'm happy, with just continuing these rights of way and the streetlights onto our December 18th agenda, as well as this next discussion item, but we still need to have this discussion, so. Are you comfortable not taking a motion? Okay, all right. Just to give,
You got a hand raised.
oh, thank you. Christina?
Yes, hi, thank you. Could one of you, just talk about, are there, safety issues, surrounding the lights? I know you have the dark sky ordinance and things like that, but are there, with some of the wiring issues and other things, I mean, have there been any, accidents, either somebody walking down the street at night, walking their dog maybe, or something like that, the city has been made aware of? Just trying to kind of think about, I believe Ian, you were talking about, grants associated with streetlight replacement, and that's my specialty is, obviously pursuing funding. But I'm just trying to kind of think about some other angles on that piece. So could one or several of you kind of talk about that, if that is an issue?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. And I can say from experience, our current lights, are, they are not safe at all. I personally have almost hit someone in the crosswalk when it's dark because the light is just, it's glaring and it doesn't direct the light. It doesn't cast it down. It's just this glow. And I'm not aware of anyone that has been struck in the dark. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened, but I think that the current design as it is really unsafe just because of the glare. And so, anybody else wanna fill in blanks on that?
Yeah, I have noticed, I think it's might even see right down here, and hopefully it's been fixed, but. Drove by there once and here was something that had been hit and there was like bare wires sticking up out of the ground. I'm
Oh, I
like,
think there's one.
There's a line over at Cedar.
well, that's,
Silver Creek
that's
Hotel.
not safe. And it's
Somebody put a cone on top of one of them and the thrift store put a flower pot on top of another, so.
so I think, anytime you have, bad wires,
Exposed wires.
exposed wires out there, that's another safety, component. for sure.
We've had some lights, Christina, that have been sheared off and never replaced, and I'm sure that that's an attractive nuisance.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I could follow up with our
Okay.
marshal's office on any crash reporting, regarding where it's like lighting was an issue and anecdotally confirm that a lot of near misses occur every winter when it's dark all the time.
Yeah, I think that that would be very helpful, obviously, if there's any data or, documentation out there, but also just, hearing, these, testimonies by each of you is helpful to inform, any type of grant or funding pursuits, that we would seek on behalf of the community. So the wiring issue, is their exposed wiring like low enough for children or, potentially pets,
Yeah,
other
it's lighting
people?
outside, I don't know
What's
if-
that? Are they live wires?
I don't think they're live,
Oh,
but there's definitely exposed wire.
yeah,
all right.
On site.
Yeah, they're on the ground level.
Okay.
so yes.
Okay, and then I guess my last question on this, and then I apologize, I'm taking a lot of your time. So has ITD been pulled into the conversation at all? I know, you were saying, Diane, that that some of this has happened, or a lot of it happened several years ago, but are they aware of it? Has there been any outreach to them? Maybe they would be interested in being a good neighbor, a good partner, to the city, just kind of moving
think
forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion, if nothing else, to just inform them and involve them in the project, so at least they have a voice. It is their right of way after all, but
And I have had some conversations, just
Oh, you have?
noted that we're working on fixing the street lighting, that's the extent of the conversation.
is any of that part of their master transportation plan? Are you aware of?
Don't think so, but
Well, we're certainly happy to, have those conversations, and I know Addie has a lot of really great connections with ITD. And I do as well, and so I think that it's worth definitely having that conversation, and I think they need to be involved in, the project kind of moving forward, because we certainly don't want you all to, spend good money on replacing, these critical components of your infrastructure only to have this happen again, right? So they should definitely be part of the conversation and worth asking if they want to help finance or, fund that project, I should say.
Well, in addition to that too, I think we ought to, if this has happened in so many places within our community, maybe we need to look at a different design, not just the dark sky portion, but like you move them back, do something different than we've always done, so we don't end up here again. And then also, if there is something that happens, then ITD would then be responsible for that instead of the city, and then they would replace something that and so it doesn't just fall back on city.
Yeah. So Christina, does that answer the questions that you have?
It
You had
does.
enough
It
to move
does.
forward?
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and move this agenda item to, December 18 as well. So Christina, I don't think we need to keep you on the line with us any longer.
Okay.
Unless you'd like to talk about, painting City Hall, but, I think we'll let you go.
Okay.
All
No,
right.
great to see you again there, Diane, and thanks
Right.
everybody, and we'll be in touch. I'll get these couple of questions over to Addie and Andrew, and then we'll ship those over to Brian, and you can distribute if that is the correct protocol.
Yep, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay,
That'll work.
thank you. Everybody have a great day. Bye.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Okay, then next item,
Yeah, City Hall painting, your guys' last meeting authorized up to $30,000 for the repainting of City Hall, which I thought was a very generous amount of what it was gonna cost, and our first bid came in wildly higher than that. So we are getting no bids.
yeah, it's,
What was the first bid?
$70,000. That was to, do some recalking, I mean, if you looked at the building, I'm sure you looked at the
Yep.
building. It's in pretty rough shape. And the exterior of it, I mean, for me particularly, it's really been kind of a thorn in my side for the last many years. And it's just, you know, you invite, you know, big developers to come to City Hall to have meetings with your staff, and several people have, like, they drive up to the front of the building and there's little pieces of wood hanging down and screen is hanging down and the paint is peeling off and caulking is missing and you know, I've had actually one phone call with the contractor, the developer said, I'm in front of this building. And is this your city hall? Yes, this is our city hall. So we had discussed, and I'm just giving this backstory to the new guys. I won't do this every meeting, I promise. But anyways, we talked about putting money aside to get it painted, thinking that 30,000 was a fair number, understanding that there was gonna have to be some sanding or power washing or something to take place, but the bid we got was $70,000, and that was or caulk is the wrong word, to chink or shore up the logs, but there seems to be an issue with the old logs on this building and them being able to withstand power washing.
Do we know how many square feet the building is on the outside?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's probably on that assessor's page
No, not
on
the,
GIS.
Like that.
the amount that needs to be painted.
Yeah.
Oh,
What's on the assessors
Yeah.
is. the
yeah,
ground.
right.
Hmm, I wanna say it's around 1,800.
We just got one bid.
Yeah, Chris is working on getting some. Feedback.
Well, that's been at least a month. Ian, I would love your thoughts from your
So
construction.
if it's 1,800 square feet of space, I get $38 a square foot, that's not too bad. Even at 70,000, like 30,000, I don't think you're gonna get anything close to 30,000 to paint City Hall and do any type of prep work and restoration. So,
Okay,
I mean, 70,000. Just from what I've seen, that seems pretty good.
well, we did not budget that much.
Yeah, exactly. Do we know where the $170,000 bid came from? Was it an out of area contractor?
Whoa.
Okay.
Elite.
Oh, yep, I know them.
Restoration. And so then one of the things that we were thinking is maybe taking that bid, because they did itemize in the bid. I mean, you've seen it, haven't you, John? You did. we should make sure that everybody has seen that itemized bid, but then Brian and I were thinking, well, maybe we could, you know, pare down like what's necessary, what really has to be done. And so, I guess we could have that discussion.
One of the items on the bid, I believe, was there was a decent amount of money for lead paint.
There was some lead,
Which isn't needed to my knowledge.
The upper level had low amounts of lead. Are tested.
didn't.
But it's outside,
This
right?
wall, I thought this wall out here, not this
Maybe
wall.
there was a bit on the outside of the lower level, but I don't.
We're
We-
staying outside.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Ian, you think that $38? Yeah,
That seems fairly reasonable to me, but I do most of my work up in Ketchum and things are a little bit skewed, but we could send that bid out again, that'd be interesting to see what lead paint abatement, what that was, and if we even need to do it. I guess if we're pressure washing it or sandblasting it or whatever, that would be airborne, and so we'd probably have to do something to mitigate that from going airborne.
yeah. And that's a pretty cumbersome project, as I understand it. I think we had talked about, painting the old museum. And there were findings
Mhm.
that I'm aware of, that there was a lot of
Yes.
lead paint, if not all of it, on the museum. And I think that involves like having to be fully
The
COVID
one thing that
shielded.
but on that one is extra complicated because it's a historic building and they don't wanna damage it too much. Whereas this one, they can damage it a little bit. But they just have to be a little gentler with the.
Yeah, but even though that bell tower is gonna fall through the roof at some point. Yeah. So then Ian, I'm hearing that you suggest we should try and get some, well. Can we get Chris working on getting another bid? Maybe this season is kind of winding down and
Yeah.
maybe the contractors have a little bit more opportunity to come and take a look.
Yeah, I mean, cause it would be interesting to at least see one more to see, you know, if
At
it's
least
comparable
one more.
or way off or.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, I would think we're past the painting season. Anyway, so we got a little luxury of time to
yeah,
get somebody.
yeah. It was my desire to get this done in this year, but
Yeah,
obviously that's not something that's gonna happen. So anyways, we can go ahead and move items A, B, and C to our meeting on December 18. And it seems like for the dead end rights of way, we're gonna have, hopefully some proposals to look at. As well as on the streetlights, we'll get some, maybe some cut sheets for some fixtures that might work. And then, hopefully another bid or two on painting City Hall. And the next item on the agenda, since I seem to be a chronic violator of following the agenda, is that we've already nailed that, next meeting date. So painfully.
Really?
We wanted to make sure. So, does anybody else have any questions, any concerns? Any motion to adjourn the
I
meeting?
move to adjourn the meeting.
so
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time out of your day. And Ian, thank you for.
Yeah, sorry about my tardiness.
No, please don't apologize.
What happened again?
I knew